The sun was bright, but it didn't seem to warm Eleanor's bones. She stood on the pavement outside the big glass doors of the First National Bank, a building that looked more like a spaceship than a place for money. Everything was sharp angles and cold, shiny metal. It made her feel small and out of place, like a black and white photograph that had been accidentally dropped into a world of color. She clutched the strap of her old leather purse, her knuckles white. The purse was soft and worn from years of use, a gift from Arthur on their 30th anniversary. He had said, "Something to hold all our adventures, Ellie." Now, it mostly just held her bus pass, a few crumpled tissues, and the documents that were the reason for this daunting trip. Taking a deep breath that did little to calm the fluttering in her chest, she pushed the heavy door and stepped inside. The bank was even colder inside. A blast of air conditioning hit her face, carrying the faint, sterile smell of cleaning products and money. The lights on the ceiling were long, white tubes that hummed with a low, anxious buzz, a sound that seemed to get right inside her head. It was a sound that always made her feel jittery. Her eyes scanned the room. There were a few people sitting in sleek, modern chairs that looked more like sculptures than furniture, their thumbs flying across the screens of their phones. No one was talking. The only sounds were the hum of the lights, the quiet tapping of keyboards behind the counter, and the gentle whoosh of the automatic doors. It was a quiet that felt loud and empty to her. She joined the line, standing behind a young man who was wearing headphones and nodding his head to a rhythm she couldn't hear. Eleanor felt a familiar pang of being left behind. The world had moved on to a new beat, and she was still stuck listening to the old songs. She looked down at her hands. They were spotted with age and trembled slightly, a fact that made her self-conscious. She tucked them into the pockets of her old cardigan, feeling the crinkle of the papers inside. She had checked them a dozen times that morning, laying them out on her kitchen table like a deck of cards. The check, her driver's license, a bank statement from last month, and a letter from the insurance company. She hoped it would be enough. The check was the most important thing. It wasn't a lot of money, but to her, it was a fortune. It was the final payout from a life insurance policy Arthur had taken out for her, a small one he'd set aside and forgotten about. When the letter had come, she had almost thrown it away, thinking it was just another piece of junk mail. But her neighbor's grandson had been visiting and had read it for her. "Wow, Grandma Ellie," he had said, his young face full of excitement. "You're rich." She had laughed at the time, but the thought of that money had planted a seed in her mind. It was enough for the new hearing aid she had been putting off for months. Her old one whistled and crackled, making conversations sound like she was listening to a faulty radio. A new one would mean she could hear her grandchildren's voices clearly, hear the birds sing in the morning, and not have to constantly ask people to repeat themselves. It wasn't just a device. It was a chance to feel connected to the world again. The line shuffled forward. Eleanor took a small step, her worn-out shoes making a soft scuffing sound on the polished floor. She hated coming to the bank. It used to be a simple, friendly place. She remembered when the tellers knew her by name, when they would ask about Arthur and the kids. Now the tellers were young, efficient strangers who spoke in a language of apps, passwords, and online verification. The last time she had tried to use the ATM machine, she had gotten her card stuck, and a security guard had to help her. The embarrassment had kept her away for over a year, but today she had no choice. The check was made out to her, and it had to be cashed in person. She began to rehearse what she would say, her lips moving silently. "Good morning. I would like to cash this check, please." Simple enough? But then what? What if they asked her questions she couldn't answer? What if her ID wasn't good enough? Her driver's license had expired a few weeks ago. She hadn't meant to let it lapse, but getting to the DMV was a whole other adventure. It meant taking 2 buses and waiting in a long line, and the thought of it was exhausting. She had her old bank card, the one without a chip, and a recent bill with her name and address on it. She hoped that would be enough to prove who she was. She was Eleanor Vance. She had lived at the same address for 55 years. She had raised 3 children in that house and had buried her husband of 60 years from that house. Who else could she possibly be? The young man in front of her finished his business and walked away, still nodding to his silent music. Suddenly, Eleanor was at the front of the line. The teller looked up at her, a polite but practiced smile on his face. He was very young, with a smooth face and neat hair. His name tag said Brian. Eleanor's heart began to beat a little faster, a frantic drum against her ribs. She felt a drop of sweat trickle down her back. She pulled her trembling hands from her pockets and laid her documents on the counter, trying to smooth them out with her palm. The check felt flimsy and insignificant under the bright lights of the bank. She took one last breath and looked at the young man, hoping her voice wouldn't shake. The young man behind the counter, Brian, took the check from her trembling fingers. His movements were quick and practiced, like a machine performing a task. He glanced at the check, then at her driver's license. Eleanor held her breath, her heart thumping a nervous rhythm against her ribs. She watched his eyes scan the small plastic card, and then she saw it, a tiny flicker of confusion, a slight tightening of his jaw. He looked from the license back to her, his polite smile now looking thin and stretched. He began to type on his keyboard, his fingers flying across the keys with a speed that made Eleanor's own ache. The clicking sound was sharp and loud in the quiet bank. He tapped a few more keys, then paused, his brow furrowed in concentration. He clicked the mouse a couple of times, his frown deepening. Eleanor felt a cold knot form in her stomach. She knew that look. It was the look of a problem. She had seen it on the doctor's face before he gave her bad news, on the plumber's face when he told her the whole boiler needed to be replaced. "I'm sorry." "Ma'am," Brian said, his voice suddenly louder and more official. It carried a few feet, and Eleanor saw the woman behind her glance up from her phone. "There seems to be an issue with your identification." He pushed the driver's license back across the counter towards her, his finger pointing to a tiny date in the corner. "This license expired 2 months ago. Our system won't accept it. It's a security policy." The words hit Eleanor like a splash of cold water. 2 months. She had forgotten. In the grand scheme of things, what did 2 months matter? She was still the same person. Her face hadn't changed. Her address hadn't changed. She was still Eleanor Vance, the same woman who had been banking at this very branch for over 50 years, long before Brian was even born. "Oh," she said, her voice coming out as a small squeak. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Oh, dear. I am so sorry. I completely forgot." She fumbled in her purse, her fingers clumsy and stiff. "But I have other things. Surely these will help?" She pulled out the old bank card, the one with the worn-out numbers on the front. She also found the gas bill from last month, her name and address printed in bold black letters. She laid them on the counter next to the check, trying to smooth them out with her palm. "Here, this has my name on it. And I've had this bank account since before you were working here, I imagine." Brian looked at the documents, but his expression didn't change. He shook his head gently. "I'm very sorry, ma'am, but without a valid government-issued photo ID, my hands are tied. It's policy for fraud prevention." He spoke the word policy like it was a holy word, something that could not be questioned or broken. Eleanor felt a wave of panic wash over her. But this is all I have?" she pleaded, her voice growing a little louder, a little more desperate. "The money is for a hearing aid? I can't hear properly anymore. This check is from my husband's old insurance policy. He passed away, you see. It's important." She hated the sound of her own voice, whiny and weak. She hated having to explain her personal life to this young stranger who looked at her with no sympathy in his eyes, seeing the growing line and the rising distress in the old woman's voice. Brian seemed to decide the situation was above his pay grade. He made a small gesture with his hand, catching the eye of a woman standing by a desk in the corner. She was dressed in a sharp navy blue suit, her hair pulled back into a severe, tight bun. She walked over, her heels clicking sharply on the polished floor, each click sounding like a tick of a clock counting down Eleanor's last bit of dignity. "What's the problem, Brian?" the manager asked, her voice crisp and impatient. She didn't even look at Eleanor at first. Her eyes were fixed on the computer screen. "It's this customer's ID, ma'am," Brian explained, his voice lowering slightly. "It's expired. She wants to cash a check, but the system won't let me process it." Now the manager turned her attention to Eleanor. Her eyes swept over her from her old cardigan to her scuffed shoes, a look of pure, unfiltered annoyance on her face. She picked up the expired license with 2 fingers as if it were dirty. "This is no good," she said, her voice loud and clear, not even trying to be discreet. "This is completely invalid. We cannot accept this." The knot in Eleanor's stomach tightened into a hard, painful stone. The people in the line were definitely watching now. She could feel their eyes on her, a mixture of impatience and curiosity. It felt like a spotlight was shining down on her, exposing every wrinkle, every gray hair, every sign of her age. "But I have other things," Eleanor said again, her voice barely a whisper now. She pointed at the documents on the counter. "My bill, my old bank card." The manager dismissed them with a wave of her hand. "Those don't prove anything," she said, her tone dismissive and condescending. "Anyone could print a bill. We need valid, current, government-issued photo ID. It's a very simple rule." She then turned back to Brian, speaking about Eleanor as if she were a piece of furniture or a malfunctioning machine. "You need to explain to the customer that we cannot serve her without the proper identification. It's for her own protection, as well as the bank's." Each word was a little prick, a tiny needle of shame. Eleanor's face began to feel hot. A deep, painful blush crept up her neck and spread across her cheeks. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the line on her. She imagined what they were thinking. "Look at that old woman causing a scene. Doesn't she understand the rules? Why is she holding everyone up?" She wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor and vanish. She felt small and foolish, a relic from a bygone era who couldn't keep up with the simple rules of the modern world. The manager's voice seemed to get even louder. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside. You're holding up the line for other customers who have their business in order." The words were like a slap in the face. Eleanor felt her eyes start to sting with tears. She fought them back, blinking rapidly. She would not cry. She would not give them the satisfaction. With a hand that trembled so badly she could barely control it, she began to slowly gather her documents, stuffing them back into her worn purse. The check for the hearing aid, the proof of her identity, the proof of her very existence, was now just a worthless piece of paper. She stood there, defeated and humiliated, the weight of the manager's words and the silent judgment of the strangers pressing down on her, making it hard to breathe. The world had shrunk to the size of the polished counter in front of her. Eleanor's fingers, stiff and clumsy, fumbled with the clasp of her purse. The sound of it clicking shut seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden silence that had fallen around her. She could feel the manager's eyes on her, a hard, impatient stare that felt like it was pushing her out the door. The weight of the stares from the people in the line was a physical pressure on her back, a heavy cloak of judgment. She wanted to run, to escape the cold, sterile air and the suffocating shame, but her legs felt like they were made of lead. She was trapped, a specimen under a microscope, her failure to navigate the modern world on full display. Her vision began to blur, and she blinked hard, fighting back the hot tears that threatened to spill over and seal her humiliation. Just as she was about to turn and shuffle away in defeat, a quiet voice spoke from behind her. "Excuse me." The voice was calm and low, but it cut through the tension in the room like a warm knife through butter. It wasn't loud, yet every head turned. The manager, who had been about to say something else to Eleanor, snapped her mouth shut and looked towards the back of the line, her annoyance clearly visible on her face. A man stepped forward from the group of waiting customers. He was dressed simply in a dark hoodie and a worn baseball cap, pulled low over his eyes. He moved with an easy, unassuming grace, not like someone looking for a confrontation, but like someone who had seen something that wasn't right and decided. He couldn't just stand by and watch. The manager's expression was one of deep irritation. "Sir, we are dealing with a situation here. You'll have to wait your turn in line." Her tone was sharp, meant to put him back in his place, The man ignored her sharpness. He took another step closer, his gaze fixed on the manager, but then it shifted, and for the first time, he looked directly at Eleanor. His eyes, visible under the shadow of the cap's brim, were kind. They held a look of gentle concern that made Eleanor's breath catch in her throat. He then looked back at the manager, his voice still quiet, but now with an edge of firmness that hadn't been there before. "Is there a problem here?" he asked again. It was in that moment that the manager really looked at him. Her eyes narrowed, then widened slightly. Her professional mask of annoyance cracked, replaced by a flicker of confusion and then dawning recognition. Her mouth fell open a little. The young teller, Brian, who had been watching the exchange with wide, nervous eyes, suddenly straightened up, his own face a picture of shock. A low murmur went through the line of customers as people began to crane their necks, whispers bouncing off the marble walls. "Is that? It can't be. It looks just like him." The man in the hoodie seemed completely unaware of the stir he was causing. He didn't preen or acknowledge the whispers. His focus remained entirely on the two women behind the counter and the old woman standing between them. He was just a person asking a question, seeking to understand. The manager, now flustered and stammering, tried to regain her composure. Well, yes, there is a bit of an issue. Sir, this customer's identification is expired, and we cannot process her transaction. It's bank policy?" The man nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. He then turned his full, undivided attention back to Eleanor. The world seemed to fall away again, but this time, it wasn't a world of shame. It was a world that had narrowed to just the two of them. He took a small step to the side, positioning himself slightly in front of her, a quiet, protective barrier. He wasn't blocking her, but he was shielding her from the manager's harsh gaze. "Ma'am," he said, his voice soft and gentle, "are you okay?" The simple question, asked with such genuine warmth, almost broke her. No one had asked her if she was okay. They had only told her what was wrong, what she had done wrong, what rule she had broken. A single, hot tear escaped and traced a path down her wrinkled cheek. She quickly wiped it away, nodding, unable to find her voice. He gave her a small, reassuring smile before turning back to the manager. The calm authority in his posture was undeniable. He wasn't angry or aggressive. He was just resolute. "She's trying to cash a check," he stated simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "There must be a way to verify her identity. Let's be reasonable." The manager, now fully aware of who she was speaking to, was a completely different person. The sharp corporate enforcer was gone, replaced by a flustered employee eager to please. "Of course, Mr. Reeves," she said, her voice now high and deferential. "Of course. We have to be very careful, you understand. For security reasons." Keanu Reeves nodded, his expression unwavering. "I understand," he said, his tone even. "But protocol should help people, not humiliate them." The words were spoken softly, but they landed with the weight of a stone in the quiet bank. They were a gentle rebuke, a lesson in humanity that hung in the air, undeniable and true. Eleanor stood there, watching this famous man, this stranger, defend her with such quiet dignity. The burning shame in her chest began to cool, replaced by a profound and overwhelming sense of gratitude. The world hadn't just shrunk. It had been turned completely upside down, and for the first time all day, she felt like she wasn't alone. The words hung in the air, soft but powerful, like a gentle hand that had just slapped everyone in the room. Protocol should help people, not humiliate them. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. The manager, who just moments ago had been a fortress of corporate rules, looked as if she had been deflated. Her sharp suit suddenly seemed too big for her, her professional armor crumbling to reveal a flustered, uncertain woman underneath. Her face, which had been a mask of impatience, was now a canvas of shock and embarrassment. The other customers, who had been watching with a mixture of annoyance and curiosity, were now completely still, their phones forgotten in their hands. The entire bank was holding its breath. The manager swallowed hard, her eyes darting from the kind-faced man in the hoodie to the old woman standing beside him. "Of course, Mr. Reeves," she stammered, her voice a few octaves higher than it was before. You are absolutely right. I apologize. The apology was not just to him, but she turned slightly, her eyes meeting Eleanor's for a brief second, a flicker of genuine remorse in them before she looked away, ashamed. Let me get someone who can help. Right away. She scurried over to a desk in the corner and spoke in hushed, urgent tones to an older woman who had been reviewing some paperwork. The older woman listened, her eyes widening as she glanced over at the small group by the counter. She nodded, her expression serious and kind, and then she rose from her chair and walked towards them. Her movements were calm and measured, a stark contrast to the manager's frantic energy. While this was happening, the man turned his full attention back to Eleanor. The protective barrier he had created around her felt warm and safe. Don't worry, he said, his voice a low, soothing rumble. We'll get this sorted out. Just take a deep breath. He smiled at her again, a simple, genuine smile that reached his eyes and made them crinkle at the corners. It was the kind of smile that made you feel like everything was going to be okay. Eleanor found herself nodding. Even though her mind was still reeling, she felt like she was in a dream. This kind man, this famous person she had only ever seen on a screen in her living room, was standing right here, talking to her, defending her. The hot shame that had been burning in her chest was being replaced by a different kind of warmth, a slow spreading glow of gratitude and disbelief. She looked at his hands, resting on the counter. They were clean, but one of his knuckles was a little scraped, a small, human detail that made him seem more real. The older woman from the desk arrived. She had a gentle face and silver hair pinned up in a soft bun. Hello, she said, her voice warm and welcoming. My name is Helen. I'm the branch supervisor. I hear we've had a bit of a difficult morning. Let's see if we can make it better. She completely ignored the manager and the first teller, focusing only on Eleanor and her companion. She needs to cash this check, the man in the hoodie said simply, gesturing to the check still lying on the counter. Her ID is expired, but I'm sure we can find another way to verify her identity. Absolutely, Helen said with a firm nod. She looked at Eleanor, her eyes full of empathy. Ma'am, do you have your social security card with you? Or perhaps know your account number? If you've been with us a long time, we can often verify your identity using older information in our system. Eleanor's fingers trembled as she opened her purse again. This time, she didn't feel clumsy or foolish. With the man's calm presence beside her and the kind woman's patient gaze, she felt a small spark of her old confidence return. I think I have my social security card, she said, her voice a little stronger now. And my account number, I have it written down at home. But I've had this account for a very, very long time. Since 1968, a look of recognition passed over Helen's face. 1968? That's a long time. Let me see what I can do. She took the check and Eleanor's expired license. Let's start with your social security number. Eleanor recited the numbers, her voice clear and steady. The man stood silently by her side, a quiet, reassuring presence. As Helen typed the numbers into her computer, Eleanor glanced at him. He was looking at her with a small, encouraging smile. In that moment, he wasn't a movie star. He was just a good person, a kind stranger who had stepped in when she needed help most. Okay, I have your profile pulled up, Helen said, her eyes scanning the screen. And yes, I see the account opened in 1968. Now, for security, can you tell me the address you had when you first opened this account? Eleanor's mind raced, but the memory surfaced, clear as a bell. It was on Oak Street, a little apartment above the bakery. The number was 2B. Helen's face broke into a wide smile. That's it, perfect. She typed a few more things, then the printer by her desk whirred to life. She pulled out a slip of paper and looked at Eleanor, her eyes shining. Well, Mrs. Vance, everything is in order. We are absolutely delighted to cash this for you. I am so sorry for the trouble you had earlier. That is not the standard of service we aim for here. The relief that washed over Eleanor was so powerful it almost brought her to her knees. She felt the man beside her give a small, satisfied nod. Helen counted out the cash, the crisp bills making a satisfying snapping sound. She handed the stack to Eleanor. "There you go. You take care of yourself." Eleanor's hands were still shaking as she reached for the money. Before she could fumble and drop it, the man's hands were there. He gently cupped his hands under hers, steadying them as she took the cash. It was a small gesture, but it felt incredibly tender. "Here," he said softly, "let me help you put that away." He waited while she opened her purse. Then he helped her neatly place the thick envelope of cash inside the zippered compartment. Making sure it was secure, the entire experience had transformed. The cold, hostile bank had become a place of warmth and kindness. The humiliation had been replaced by a profound sense of being cared for. As Eleanor snapped her purse shut, she looked up at her defender. He had done so much more than just solve her problem. He had restored her dignity simply by treating her like a human being who mattered. He didn't make a big show of it. He was just decent. It was the most powerful thing she had ever witnessed. The heavy glass door of the bank swung shut behind them, and the sterile, humming silence was replaced by the vibrant, chaotic symphony of the city. A car horn blared, a siren wailed in the distance, and the chatter of people on the sidewalk filled the air. To Eleanor, it was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. It was the sound of the real world, a world she had been afraid she was no longer a part of just minutes ago. The man in the hoodie walked beside her, his pace slow and steady, matching hers. He didn't say anything at first, just letting the fresh air and the noise of the street wash away the lingering stuffiness of the bank. She clutched her purse, feeling the reassuring shape of the envelope inside. The money was there, safe and sound. But it felt less important than it had when she first walked in. The real treasure was the quiet presence of the man walking next to her, a silent guardian who had appeared out of nowhere. She glanced up at him, at the strong line of his jaw and the gentle eyes hidden beneath the brim of his cap. He seemed so normal, so unassuming. If you passed him on the street, you wouldn't look twice. And yet he possessed a power that had nothing to do with fame. It was the power of kindness. "Thank you," she said, her voice still a little shaky. "I don't know what I would have done. I was so embarrassed." He turned his head to look at her, and his eyes were full of understanding. "You don't have to thank me," he said softly. "They were wrong. It's as simple as that." He paused for a moment, then asked, "What was the money for, if you don't mind me asking?" A small smile touched Eleanor's lips. "It's for a new hearing aid," she said. "My old one is, well, it's old. It whistles and crackles. I miss hearing things properly. My grandchildren's voices, the birds singing in the morning. Silly things, I guess." "That's not silly at all," he replied, his voice serious. "Those are the most important things." He looked away for a second, a thoughtful expression on his face. "My grandmother had trouble with her hearing. She said it was like being in a room full of people and feeling completely alone." He looked back at Eleanor. "It's good that you're getting a new one. It's important to stay connected to the world." His words were so simple, yet they felt so profound. He wasn't just making small talk. He was truly listening. He understood. They walked a little further in comfortable silence, the city bustling around them. Eleanor felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. The shame from the bank had been completely erased, replaced by a warm, glowing feeling of gratitude. "Where are you headed now?" he asked. "Do you have far to go?" "Just to the bus stop on the corner," she said. "Then it's 2 buses to get home." He nodded, then stepped to the edge of the curb, raising his hand with an easy confidence. A yellow cab, which had been driving a block away, immediately swerved and pulled over to the curb in front of them. He opened the back door for her, holding it with one hand. "Let me give you a ride home," he said. It wasn't a question, but it was said with such gentleness that it felt like an offer she couldn't refuse. "Oh no, I couldn't possibly," she protested. "It's too much. You've already done so much." "I insist," he said, his smile warm and disarming. "Please." Eleanor hesitated for a moment, then nodded and slid into the back seat of the cab. The leather was cool and smooth against her skin. He followed her in, giving the driver her address, which she recited from memory. As the cab pulled out into traffic, he sat beside her, not saying much, just looking out the window. The silence was not awkward. It was peaceful. When they pulled up in front of her small, neat house with its little patch of garden, he turned to her. "Don't let one bad experience ruin your faith in people," he said softly. "There are more good people in the world than bad. Sometimes you just have to look a little harder to find them." He then handed the driver a bill from his wallet. Eleanor couldn't see the amount, but she saw the driver's eyes widen in surprise. "Keep the change," he said to the driver. "Just make sure she gets inside safely." He opened his door and helped Eleanor out of the cab. He walked her to her front door and waited on the porch while she fumbled for her keys. When she finally unlocked the door, she turned to him, her heart overflowing with a gratitude so deep she couldn't find the words to express it. "Thank you," she whispered, the words feeling inadequate. "Thank you for everything." He just smiled, that same gentle, genuine smile. "You're very welcome, Eleanor. Take care." And then he was gone, walking down the path and disappearing into the evening just as quietly as he had appeared. Eleanor stood in her doorway for a long time, watching the empty street. She went inside, her house feeling warmer and more welcoming than it had in years. She placed her purse on the kitchen table and sat down. The events of the afternoon were playing in her mind. The story she would tell her family that night wouldn't be about being humiliated at the bank. It would be about the day a movie star became a guardian angel. It would be about the quiet power of kindness and how a single person's compassion could change everything. The money for the hearing aid was a wonderful thing, but it was the memory of the man in the hoodie that she would treasure for the rest of her days. He had given her something far more valuable than money. He had given her back her dignity, and in doing so, he had reminded her that even in a world that often felt too fast and too cold, profound and unexpected grace still existed, waiting just around the corner.